Darklings! So today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite Victorian vampires that predates Dracula by more than 20 years, which is Carmilla. So for those of you who do not know what Carmilla is, it is a 1872 novella from Sheridan Le Fanu, who is an Irish writer, and it is the story of a young girl named Laura who's kind of fragile, dainty, kind of lives by herself with her father, doesn't have a lot of company, and then makes the acquaintance of this beautiful, mysterious, dark-haired girl named Carmilla. And then you realize that Carmilla is not quite who she claims to be, and is in fact a vampire. And what makes this really interesting, especially for being published in the 1870s, is the really, really strong lesbian overtones that are like, you can't miss them. It's not even subtext, it's just text. So originally it was published in Le Fanu's anthology series, The Dark Blue, and it was also republished in A Glass Darkly, which is just the one I happen to have. I do highly recommend reading this one. It's better written than Dracula. I love Dracula, but I can also rag on that book and subsequent movie adaptations for 6 days. So today is about Carmilla and subsequent other lesbian vampire or female vampires in film. So pretty much the first adaptation of Carmilla in film is Carl Dreyer's The Vampire in 1932, which also took a lot of influence from several other of Le Fanu's works. So it's not exactly Carmilla, and any lesbian overtones are completely and utterly removed, and instead the whole thing has a very dreamlike quality. It's a very good, almost silent film that I do highly recommend watching regardless. For another adaptation that includes strong lesbian overtones for vampirism is Dracula's Daughter, which has nothing to do with the Carmilla story, but if you are interested, this film was very controversial upon its release in 1933. So that's also something of note. A pretty faithful and one of my preferred adaptations for Carmilla on the screen is Blood and Roses, which is a French film from 1960. The director was married to the lead at the time, but this one's very pretty and very lush and is relatively close to the original story. Another adaptation, which I actually haven't seen, surprisingly enough, is from 1964 with Christopher Lee, and that is Crypta the Vampire, which has more to do with ghosts and other things favored in Spanish Gothic films in the 60s, more so than actual vampires. Another one, which I haven't seen because I just never really got into his work, is Jesus Franco's Vampiros Lesbos, which is considered kind of his crowning achievement film, and I just haven't seen it, but I figured it was of note. Otherwise, I do recommend watching The Vampire Lovers with Ingrid Pitt, which was Hammer's take on it, and it's actually not that far off. They did change details, but overall, tonally, I think it is pretty close to the original novella. However, the rather terrible sequels to make up the remainder of the Karnstein trilogy, Lust for Vampire and Twins of Evil, they're only good if you really prefer like lesbian softcore porn, and they're mostly just kind of nonsensical. But otherwise, in the same vein, Ingrid Pitt plays Countess Dracula, which is supposedly Elizabeth Bathory, and I could do a big lecture on Elizabeth Bathory for a long period of time, but I'm trying to simplify it for today's purpose. Anyway, this is also the idea of the female bloodsucker in pulp cinema. So both of these are totally worth watching. Again, with the heavy lesbian undertones and also keeping it with Countess Bathory. This is Daughters of Darkness, which is a Belgian or Dutch or whatever film from the early 70s. It's pretty lurid and kind of nonsensical, but also very interesting. And then you have Bathory being this kind of predatory type of figure as well. So other interesting Carmilla adaptations, loose though they may be, is the Spanish film from 1972, Blood Spotted Bride. There's also the black and white Polish straight-to-TV movie from 1982, Carmilla. There is the Nightmare Classics Carmilla that was available, I think, through Showtime or something in '89 with Ione Skye. Then you also have a smaller, more strange cameo appearances for Carmilla in things such as Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust from 2001. I'm not an anime person, so I haven't seen it. Lesbian Vampire Killers, which is a horror comedy from 2009. The Moth Diaries, which is actually based off of a novel of the same name that makes a lot of allusions and connections to the original novel of Carmilla, even if it isn't the same story. And then you have 2 movies from 2014 that try and retell it in a more modern and different setting, including 2014's The Unwanted, which was okay, and The Curse of Styria, which I haven't seen all of. I think I saw the first little bit of it, and it was, again, just okay. Otherwise, if you had more interest in Elizabeth Bathory and how it most likely went down, if you're still keeping with the she was actually a murderer theme, The Countess with Julie Delpy is really the best one. I've recommended it so many times, there's no use in going into it at length. Anyway, lesbian vampires seems to be a reoccurring theme, and part of it is this negative connotation of lesbianism being predatory, which generally speaking I don't approve of because that's derogatory and sexist. But part of it, I think, comes from this idea that predatory females are terrifying, and for them to be bloodsuckers is not out of the scheme of people's conscience. Like, I don't know. Anyway, it makes for a very interesting, long-running trend that seems to keep popping up, whether we need it to or not. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Anyway, I hope that you get the chance to look into some of these films, and please do read the novella if you haven't already. Till next time, Darklings.